Well, the problem is not in is God a person or simply a personification of values. The problem arises from not knowing what a person is. I know what I occupy. I occupy this body and I present as this life in this universe. But I don't know who I am, except in terms of this universe that I've experienced, which is extremely limited, of course. I only have cognizance of it in general for the last, in my case, 75 years. And it's a very biased view. It's the biased view that this universe gives me, in accordance with its dimensions and whatever happens in it, so to speak. It would be closer to say, can I reasonably assume that God is a person like myself? And being a child of God encompasses that, in that we're of the same sort of substance. If substance were a valid way of thinking of what God's made of. Now I know that principles are very important as regards ease of living, getting the right principles as opposed to the wrong ones. In fact, we define right and wrong in those terms, really, which are beneficial to us and which aren't. And even the notion of beneficial is defined in terms of this universe and what we see as a value in this universe. In particular, remaining in it. Most people want to continue living, otherwise they exit quite quickly. So that it's dominated by people who choose to continue living in some sense, if nothing else by default. So to say that God is a personification of these values is, in a sense, no more nor less perhaps than saying I personify my set of values, even though I'm not terribly clear what they are, and if I analyze them, I start to change them. We are an evolving entity from our own point of view, and I do just mean from our own point of view. I'm not sure about any other view. And our view of God evolves too, from our own point of view. You know, we don't in general see him now as a thundering war god from the mountains. We think of him as a loving person of integrity, a father figure perhaps. Now, we find it expedient to think of him in terms of a person, in a sense, as we are persons. It's just that we're not at all clear what we mean by our personhood or his. But we find it expedient. It works. Well, I mean, you may not have practiced it, but I mean, you may find that it works to visualize him as father and you as child, in some sense of a similar substance, a similar nature, or whatever personhood is. And in fact, in some sense, that he may have the values as a parent that he wants you to become like him. What I'm saying is we can only understand it in this way because this is the situation we are in and come from. We modify that situation to some extent by analysis of it and thought and reflection and further experience. Our ideas about ourselves and who we are also change. And God changes with us in a sense that our view of God, our understanding, our need for God changes in a different way. We may in some sense be visualizing something beyond us that is greater than us, like a parent. So that, the kids change a great deal in a few years. The parents seem to change not to the kiddie, but the parent knows that the parent's changing. So we're assuming and living according to the notion that a person of God exists. And we may find, and do find, I think, in general, there are all sorts of exceptions, of course, but that this is helpful. And if you don't find it helpful, if you're alienated by it, then, of course, you reject it. And in some ways, it seems that if this God does exist, he allows you to do that, at least for a certain number of years. I mean, we all seem to get terminated at some point from the point of view of this universe anyway. You see, it's instrumentalism in a sense, isn't it, that we fall back on, in that we say, well, what do I seem to need? And I relate very well to persons, so if my understanding of God is personified, that seems to work better than anything else. Am I to assume that, well, this works very well, but it's not the truth, and I must think of God in a completely different way? On what grounds do you protect that argument? And I mean, that completely different way might be that he doesn't exist at all. How do you support this as being useful, beneficial, instrumental in bringing your welfare and happiness? Does it result in joy and peace and happiness, the things that presumably you value, same as I do in large measure, more or less? Or does it result in despair, depression, and suicide? To some extent, if you can't come to a conclusion simply by looking at such as we can see in this universe of uncertainty in our experience, then you have to experience it still yourself. Then you taste and you see. Does this work? Does this not work? Do I value this or not? How could I ever value something that I don't value? I'd have to change my values first, wouldn't I? I can only value what I value. I mean, it's almost a truism. I mean, that's what we mean by value. Now, what I value can change, and it does change, it seems to, doesn't it, by the limited experiences that we have in this universe of uncertainty. I change my view of what I value and my view of myself, what its value is, and I change my view of what personhood is. My personhood, the view of those around me, and my view of God changes too. I'm not saying that God has or hasn't changed. I am saying my view has changed, and what I'm finding to be instrumentally a blessing to me can be changing, and therefore my view of God. But it's still unquestionably the best thing to do. In fact, it's the only thing to do. I can only value what I value. We're back to the problem, aren't we? I can't tell you to love me. You either love me or you don't, because you see me as having the values that you value, or you see me as not having them and therefore don't love me. Is it Martin Luther again? Here I stand. I can only value what I value. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, if our God doesn't rescue us from the fiery flames, still we will not value you. We're not going to worship you, mate. No, I'm not going to love you anyway. I mean, you may force us to worship you, but we're not going to love you, mate. Our God is our God. That's who we are. As is the shrine, so is the worshipper. What you worship is what you value, is what you are. Of course, you may be declaring something other than what you truly worship. You may be saying, no, I worship the God of Israel, but really, I worship my view of Jesus. You may be putting up a front because society presses you to do so, or your society, that, as you see it, that benefits you most. But at heart, you can only value what you truly value, and that's what you truly can love and need to love with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength to find out if it's true. There are risks and dangers involved. You don't want to terminate life in doing it, so you may be making all sorts of compromises in the meantime. But essentially, that's what you need to do. You need to find out, always, what do I value? That's what I value. And personifying that value in my mind as my God seems to be incredibly effective in fulfilling what I value. Perhaps because from the first consciousness of childhood, I'm aware of relationships. I'm looking into mum's face. Well, ideally. I mean, some loving person's face that's looking after me anyway, the one that's feeding me. Might be dad. Might be a wolf. The myth of how Rome was, these twins that were brought up by wolves. Yeah. Let me pause. Well, I've listened to this through. I'm quite chuffed at this. It seems to be a shot at what I mean. Actually, I'm incredibly helped by, amazingly, reading this book, The Trouble with God by David Bolton. In particular, I've been moved with somewhere around pages, somewhere around 150, 151, somewhere there, that's talking about the instrumentalist view, and I realise, my goodness, I'm an instrumentalist in a sense. I'm not sure that I'm quite the same as what I'm reading here, but it's a very helpful book. You might find it's a devastating book, so be cautious, for goodness sake. I'm not asking you to plunge in, but just to say that's where I seem to be at the minute. And as you can see, I don't love God the less, my goodness. I love him all the more. How could I not? It's my God. You may say, you've made him in your own image, Marshall. Oh, yes. What else did I have? They were the only bricks I had. I can only play with the toys I've been given. Love you, Lord. Thank you. Thank you, Dad. Thank you, Dad. Thank you, Dad. Oh, goodness, I've classified myself as an instrumentalist, haven't I? I bet I'm not, though, when I look at it closely. I bet there's some major qualification I want to put in here. And perhaps I have already. Yes. But, thank you, Dad. Oh, no, it's come to me in the bathroom just now, and it occurs to me, no, it's not that I've classified myself. Mankind in this universe, all life in this universe seems to be instrumentalist, or it doesn't stay here very long. In some sense, you see, you have to be doing that which continues your life here, or your life ends, which is what I was saying in recording. Starts to be terminated quite quickly. We are here of necessity. Same as organizations, their first priority has to be survival, or they don't last long and they achieve nothing. So every organization's priority is survival, and every life form seems to present itself as its priority being to survive first. Can worry about other goals afterwards, but that has to be cardinal, must be achieved, priority first. So I'm saying that no matter what religion you find you are in and have, it's evidence that you are an instrumentalist, in that you can't be in this universe for long otherwise. Now, you could say, yeah, well, that is the case. People get martyred. Jesus got crucified. He didn't stay long. Right, but your view of Jesus must be such that it's instrumental in keeping you here. Or at least if it's not, you're not likely to stay here very long. And if it's basically this view that you have of your God and religion, it is instrumentalist, then you may well have had this view for some time. I mean, it's a view that's helped you stay here. So what I'm saying is that we're attracted to that which is truly beneficial to us as we understand it from our life in this universe. It's very hard to argue anything other than that, because we're not likely to be here very long, if that's the case. Right. Thank you, Dad.